This is Modern Gaming Culture. This series will attempt to highlight the phenomenon of PC, console, and mobile gaming and bring to light all of its phenomenal aspects. Let's take a dive together into the world of modern gaming and take apart its structure. Now, here's your host, Rotimi Osagi. Alright, this is Modern Gaming Culture. This is episode 37, Modern Gaming Culture. Going to be continuing with unpacking this I consider the time you living in, which is internet dark age, emergence of what I call the internet bully. I've been using this description for your consideration with respect to this series, right? Um, so sort of just to settle in, right? Um, it's been a little bit since I've been doing like public speaking, right? So you know, it's been pretty hectic, right? Um, you can probably tell just based on how I'm kind of just um taking this episode so far. Definitely pretty low for sure. Um, you know, um, I don't want to come in here and just say the same thing over and over again, even though that's what I do. Anyways, right, Mr. Broken Record, all right. Um, but you shouldn't start from here, right? I'm not unfamiliar with internet publishing, right? Um, my contribution to gaming, right? What I call modern gaming culture, the banner, right? Displayed, right? Um, is unparalleled, right? And pioneering this sort of like self-produced style, you know, um, for internet radio, what have you. Um, so very it can become very draining, and so I'm definitely you know pretty pooped right now, I would say. um, but I haven't done um a lot of public speaking for some time, and so sort of want to just break the silence and get back on track, right, with this series, right. Um, I did quite a few episodes as sort of like breathers, if you will, um, for this series because this is going to really set myself apart, right, from anything that you would consider anything um, that you would consider to be reasonably similar, to this material, right? My whole internet publishing career, right? And so I definitely did not want to just, because I know this stuff, right? I know this stuff inside out, backwards, in my sleep, right? So, I'm not doing this for me, right? And so, um, you know, when it comes to the people I want to reach, right? It's something where I understand these people, they, bust their ass day in and day out, right? They don't necessarily need, a heavy hand, right? More than they just need, companionship, right? And so, you know, I always try to, with pace delivery, temperance, personality, right? Try to maintain, even keeled, right? Not sort of, these last few series again, right? Because it was sort of like, my deck profile series revisited, and so and my team profile series revisited, and so I definitely laid down the hammer, right? And those episodes, I enjoyed them. I enjoyed doing them, and they're probably my favorite, you know, um, videos that I've published so far, right? I think I'm pretty much done with them. I don't really want to dive too deep into it because, again, right? Kind of, with sort of keeping with the theme of breaking the silence, I want to sort of, provide my take on, Pokemon, community, whatever you want to call it. What I call, of course, modern gamer culture, right? And what I call the kings of modern gamer culture, right? Um, I was very hesitant to even do deck profiles and team profiles. I wasn't even going to do team profiles because with all the controversy surrounding VGC right now, with how a lot of people are pretty much dropping out, right, and the whole kind of like format is just changing, right? Um, I didn't want to really dip my hand into that framework, but um, I did, and I think I did a pretty good job, right? F set F I think is what they're playing right now in regionals, and then set I is on the ladder, which nobody plays, right? Which will sort of segue me into sort of providing sort of detail about kind of how I feel personally about Pokemon, right? Not necessarily Pokemon. People who play Pokemon, right? What's called the Pokemon community, right? Pretty laughingly. There's just a bunch of filthy casuals. If you been around your neck of the woods, you're pretty familiar with that term, filthy casual, right? Um, and so, I do not think one way or another about, what's termed the Pokemon community. And so, you know, um, anyone with two brain cells to run together understands that, nobody really plays Pokemon, right? There's millions of niche games out there. Obviously, there's not millions, right? But there's a lot of niche games that are there, really fun and really addictive, and don't require a lot of thought and are pretty much like engineered to really keep people playing them, right? However, brainless and brain dead they can be, right? Brain dead, right? Um, and so it's no mystery that people don't know Pokemon, right? It's something where you don't really see much shake up when it comes to actual competitive Pokemon, right? And again, right? If you've been around your neck of the woods, that's no really, I'm not really saying anything new there, right? You can just turn on social media, right? And you know, if you have a pretty good sample size of people's, algorithms, right? Because it's one thing to if it's one thing to be on social media, it's one thing to understand algorithms, right? Now I've talked pretty heftily about pretty much my take on AI and stuff like that, and this episode has been pretty good so far, and so I don't really have to get much into you know talking about Um, it's pretty much just an AI censoring people, whatever, right? But it doesn't take rocket scientists to tell you that nobody really cares about competitive Pokemon, right? People really look at Pokemon as some sort of social phenomena, which makes absolutely no sense, right? Um, and that's pretty much as far as they'll take it, right? Um, and that's pretty much the speed you'll have with people and Pokemon, right? And so it's something where again I um you know have pretty much championed this sort of dynamic of really not trying to sort of placate people's delicate sensibilities with respect to that dynamic, right? Um, and it's not like I'm the only one, right? Again, it's just I just do it at another level, and so when people do that, that's one thing, right? But um, it's another thing when I do it, right? And so that's neither here nor there, right? But that's just the bottom line, right? And so I don't really, care one way or another about people when it comes to what they think about anything related to gaming, right? Gaming, again, right? I call gaming the most abject tyranny on planet Earth, right? People think they can just take whatever hand they've been given, pun intended, and play it, right? Nothing could be further from the truth, right? People have tried to really contain themselves in gaming, and they've done so unsuccessfully, right? And now you're having this sort of people who have been dedicated to evil. Now they are on the other side of their mischief, and it's business as usual, pretty much, right? These people have had absolutely no influence, right, on gaming in any way, shape, or form. Nobody gives a damn about them, right? Because the majority of people who even participate in gaming arena, right, what I call conducting internet oversight, right, they're just huddled into what have been called internet ghettos, right? And so it's not something where I have to really fear, oh my gosh, this guy has 20,000 viewers, this guy has 15,000. None of them matters, right? And plus most of the people watching them are pretty much children anyways, literally like people who are under the age of 18, right? So it's not something where you never necessarily even have to be quote unquote afraid of these people, right? And that's no mystery, right? It's just that gaming culture has just been contained so much, just because of the incompetence surrounding it, right? As per the what I call the kings of modern gamer culture, right? You know, and so it's not something where you can just be like, oh, um, this guy's so popular. He's not, right? You've had people like Ninja, Tfue, right? Markiplier, PewDiePie, come and go. These names don't even matter anymore, right? Yanko, Santorin, Cadril, Shocks, right? Reckless, the boss, right? I kind of hesitate to even mention him, right? Haim Gosu, right? And then you just have all these other characters that have emerged through through other games, right? And ultimately, absolutely nothing has changed when it comes to Pokemon, right? Pokemon is really the litmus test for gamer culture, and so it's something where ultimately all you have to do is just trace back to Pokemon, and you'll realize that nothing has really changed, right? If anything, things have gotten infinitely worse, right? Um, so think leave it there for sort of housekeeping, right? Updates, etc. Um, and can get back on track with sort of laying out sort of with respect to this description that I've been using, right? Inherent characteristics of quote society, authority slash superior, ontological relativism, hate speech slash harmful rhetoric, quote unquote drive a wedge society, example calls for violence, death threats, harassment, stalking, etc. Right? But it pretty much sums up, people who are like, the worst among us in gaming culture, right? You know, people are dedicated to evil, plain and simple, right? Um, these are people who just don't want to work, right? They cause a lot of problems in society, right? These are people who, and the best among them are people who are pretty upstanding members of society when it comes to position, not necessarily actually status, right? And will really try to, rally the lowest among them for their own benefits, right? It's like literally akin to demonic possession, right? Like just, first, um uh exorcist style, um production film, what have you, right? That comes to mind, right? There's no shortage of them, right? And so it's something where that's ultimately what you have when it comes to these characters, right? That are you know um really um trying to, again, drive a wedge in gaming, right? Gaming, I've defined, gaming as, um, ways of cultivating aspects of yourself and respect, and relationship with others, right? And so, when you really try to, and this is nothing that's new, right? There's always been these sort of, opportunistic types to come into gaming, right? The only issue is that when it comes to Pokemon, it's all opportunistic types. And so that's ultimately why, Pokemon is starting to do a lot of stuff when it comes to, containing events, right? Really shut it off because these guys are just jumping, um, right? They really have their bosses by the, by the balls, right? They're able to just take, weekends off, right, as they wish, come into work late, whatever, right? Um, and just drop 1,500, right? These guys, they live with their parents, right? So they have no shortage of resources, right, financially. So they just drop 1,500, go fly off to Utah for a weekend and go play Pokemon, right? And Pokemon's pretty much got sick of it, and they can't even really make their events, as spectacular as they want to now. So now they're just like, you know what? We're going to just limit registration, right? So they already started, right, by basically limiting rounds, right? So really throwing a spanner in the works, right? Where it's like, you're not going to get your 14 rounds anymore. You're not going to be able to prepare for 14 rounds. And that's really what was driving a lot of these formats. Right? People were realizing, okay, well, if these events are always going to be 9 rounds, right? So why not just, you know, um, play, these kind of decks that will fit right well into a 14-round format, right? 9 rounds day one, and then 5 rounds day two, and then you cut, right? Um, and so, formats were really being driven by that. And people and Pokemon was starting to realize that, um, these guys are not trying to play the game. They're just trying to make money, right? And so they were starting to realize, these opportunistic types are popping up and they're really giving us problems, right? Because people like to play, people like to participate. Pokemon keeps a very good reputation. It doesn't matter what you think about Pokemon's business practices, whatever, right? Pokemon keeps a very good reputation. And so despite, whatever, right? Whatever you think about Pokemon, whatever, doesn't matter. Um, Pokemon's reputation still remains unstained, right? And so they have this issue with their competitive scene, right? Where Pokemon's really the game to play, but nobody plays it, right? And so it's this issue where, people are basically trying to sort of like read the tea leaves, right? Again, right? You have to go back and listen to what I've said, right? You know, show doesn't just represent me just, turn on my microphone and camera and just saying what is on my mind, right? The show represents me, you know, preparing months ahead just for the show alone, right? You have to really listen back, right? And really dig deep, right? And so it's something where, you know, um, yeah, right? You have this issue where people are sort of trying to, and these people are just absolutely delusional, right? You get all sorts of types, right? but generally you just get this type where, you know, they found this sort of, you know, fountain of youth, so to speak, and they're like, you know, I'm gonna milk this until it's dry, right? Um, and you know, again, right, game culture is very spontaneous, right? Recently it's definitely been kind of like a mad dash, you know, especially with a lot of stuff that's been going on in VGC. And so people are really trying to get in, right? Absolutely no idea what they're doing, right? And they think that somehow they're going to be able to get away with it scot free. I mean, I don't know who told you that, right? Because really, if you're opening up any product right now, a product could just soar through in prices, right? So you have like now ETBs are like $140. Before you could get an ETB, right, marked down, right, for like $50, right? And booster boxes are like $330 before you could get a booster box marked down for like 120, right? Um, right? And now you have all these new products, right? Booster bundles to sort of help people who still want to play, still want to buy, etc. Right? They don't want to buy, you know, 8 packs for $130, right? And product that they can hardly store, right? And so, you know, um, people are just like, you know, I'm gonna try and somehow I'm gonna play the fool. No, you are a fool, and you're lost too, right? Because again, right, they don't see the forest for the trees, right? So they think that people are just playing, having fun, whatever, and they're just like, no, how about let's do this right here, right now? It's like, do what, right? It's like, you know, people spend their lives doing this stuff, right? I've spent my life, you know. Again, you have to go back and listen to, you know, um, again, right? I'm not unfamiliar with internet publishing, right? And so when you really go back and you listen, right? And I'm under no delusion that I'm, you know, reaching the people. But when it comes to actually, you know, making an impact, right? That's a lot different, let's just say, than, you know, the reach I've had, which again is also as impactful, right? And so it's like I'm under no delusion that, you know, I'm really you know, seeing the tide turn, right? And it's like, you know, um, yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. It really is. Gaming is it is quite a shit show, you know, as you know, the old saying goes, right? And so now, you know, again, you know, where I'm at, you know, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, right? Um, you know, we're pretty much a hub of particularly trading card game, right? We have very high concentration of, you know, players who play um here, right? So it's something where, you know, we have a really good gauge for sort of the you know, the zeitgeist when it comes to particularly the Pokemon trading card game. So people, I don't know where they're getting this idea from. That somehow now is the time to sort of just start playing Pokemon, right? We've just been seeing a lot of just spikes in participation, etc. It's very strange, right? Um, and so it's something where, um, you know, I don't even know what to tell people, right? I'm doing the best I can, right? You know, if people, again, right, I understand the impact and the reach I'm having, right? And so it's something where, you know, it's not something where you can really hold me accountable when it comes to anything, right? Because, you know, again, people like to fall into scams, right? People like to be fooled, right? They like to be, they like to be proven wrong, right? On very serious things, right? People are just very self-loathing in that respect, right? And so it's something where, um, is there's no way to hold me accountable for anything that has occurred to you with respect to gaming, right? Where it's like, oh, I went out and I bought $20,000 worth of product, and I didn't even get a penny back, right? Or I started launching social media, and I quit my job, and I basically went to $0, right? When I was making like let's say I was making 40 grand a year, right? And now my house is foreclosed, right? I have to go live back with family, right? Or Um, you know, um, I just went to my store and I tried to buy product, right, and my credit card bounced, right, um, and it's like it's just like you cannot hold me accountable for anything, right? Because it's like if you really try to dig deep, listen to what I've been saying, no, there's no there's no hope. There's no hope, right? And so it's like, you know, again, right? Um, and so I think I'm just gonna leave it there for the former part of this episode, right? Kind of just a debrief. That is, kind of the pace I want to take the rest of unpacking this series, right? You definitely listen back to when I started. I don't know what episode it was. It might have been 26, I think. Because I know I've done about 6 or 7 tech profile and team profile videos, and I've done about 4 to 6 of these, so it might be 26, right, or 25, for the series. And then if you need a break, you can check out the tech profile and team profile videos I've done. Then you can revisit a lot of the other ones I've done as well. Um, but yeah, that's definitely gonna be the pace, right? I'm gonna be setting for the rest of the series, right? I feel like that's gonna be a very effective way to do it and very keep it compact, right? Under like 30 minutes, right? And really people will be able to receive this and really enjoy it and really try to get what I'm saying here, right? I'm very busy right now. I got a lot going on. So yeah, I'm gonna get some rest and get ready to get back to this series. So it's been Mario Culture. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you.